Hey everyone, before we start, I would like to apologize for my lack of communication and uploads. I started a new job a few weeks back, and I've been seriously struggling mentally, and it's been very draining. I've been having a bit of anxiety, and just mentally struggling to juggle everything in my head. Please be patient with me as I get through this. Now, to the stories. I was camping with some friends on a private owned land that bordered a national forest. We had our tent set up at the back of the fence, clear part of their property. The large mesh window of my tent was facing out towards the forest. As evening came and we fell asleep, I woke up in the middle of the night, feeling as if somebody was up and about. You know that feeling of somebody watching you? Well, I was looking out the window and saw a dark from head to toe, human-shaped figure lean away from a tree and slowly lean back behind the tree. It kept doing it for a few minutes, as if it was checking out our camp. That's when I woke my girlfriend up and told her I thought someone was out in the forest behind us. But when she looked, she only saw a glimpse of a dark figure running off deeper into the forest. Nobody else from our camp had been outside of their tent. There were no neighbors anywhere close, and the closest campgrounds and hiking trails were also pretty far away. When I told this to everybody else within the camp, they said that I most likely saw a bear scratching its back on the tree. Apparently, they do this a lot, and sometimes they almost look humanoid. I'm not entirely satisfied that it was a bear, because the way it looked was just giving me a creepy feeling, as if something else, aside from a bear, was out there. We don't know what's out there in the woods sometimes, as it's full of darkness and voids, but I guess that's what makes camping fun and exciting, being in the middle of nowhere, of unknown territories, being surrounded by possibly humanoid bears, skinwalkers, wendigos, or anything else that lurks out there in the darkness. I was riding the ski lift with a U.S. Army veteran last week, and we got to talking when he mentioned that he spent the last couple of years living in the South Dakota Badlands. I asked if he had seen any Sasquatches out there, based off of my friend's South Dakota Sasquatch encounter. He said he hadn't, even though he was tracking bison and coyotes through the region at the time to better understand their hunting patterns. He did, however, relay a story in which he truly felt he had a close call with a wendigo, in Kansas of all places. There's an old native Union Army trail that goes through Kansas, and my new friend, as well as my buddy of his, were hiking along the trail, enjoying the annual bird migration there, when all of a sudden, everything went deathly quiet. That's when he started hearing the sound of a woman screaming bloody murder. And even though his companion somehow couldn't hear it, the sound all throughout the hills. I think my buddy thought I was losing it, he said, but we both heard it go super quiet, which was odd in and of itself, as we were smack dab in the middle of a massive bird migration route. The Kickapoo live in the area presently, as a reservation was granted to the tribe back in 1832, and even though it was progressively reduced over the years, part of the tribe has continued to live down there in the present time. He said he had never been more sure that someone or something was trying to lure him out into the dense brush to kill him. What was odd though was that his friend couldn't seem to hear the screaming, even though it was crystal clear to his ears. I then asked if he had happened to see the creature or pinpoint the location of the screaming. Not exactly, he said. but I continue hearing weird sounds and noises, and when we camped out that night, that's when things got really bizarre. We hadn't seen a single soul for at least 2 days, and that night I was on high alert, so I had a tough time falling asleep. Every little sound had me poking out of my bivy sack with a 1911 style .45 pistol and scanning the area for any signs of movement. What was really creepy was at one point he said he thought he saw a tall dark shadow move from behind a tree to another, and possibly what might have been a hand reaching out around the tree before slowly retreating back into the stillness of the night. When he finally did fall asleep, his dreams were plagued by nightmares of him trying to escape some unseen assailant while running wildly through the brush, cutting his face and arms against the bramble. He had finally made it back to safety in the dream, at which point the dream would simply start over again, as if on repeat. This happened for what felt like ages, before he had woken up in a cold sweat and gone back to scanning around the perimeter. When at last dawn finally broke and the sun gradually began to rise, they packed up their little camp and didn't have any more run-ins with this thing, even though the experience had left them shook. In her book, American Monsters, Linda Godfrey states that the Chippewa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi tribes in Kansas believe that there is an evil, man-eating giant human who was turned into this terrifying beast due to some sins. The Chippewa believe that selfishness, gluttony, or cannibalism would turn a tribe member into the Wendigo for punishment. Descriptions vary from tribe to tribe, but most describe a large elk-like predator that preys on people who wander too far off into its domain. Many report hearing sounds such as a baby crying, a woman screaming, or a voice playing on a static loop of sorts. Perhaps a phrase the beast somehow recorded from previous victims. Typically, something to the effect of, "Who's there? I need help. I'm lost. Is someone there? Please, help me. I'm hurt." The idea being that basic human instinct will lead one off into the wilderness, attempting to help whomever they think is needing assistance. Another common theme is hearing the voice of a loved one, maybe your mother, drawing you into the woods, or even a familiar form appearing in the mist, followed by the gradual realization that the voice is off, or that the form doesn't quite fit the supposed dimensions of a human being, often too tall or too slender, with arms that are too long, and a stance more suited for a wild animal than a human person. All these possibilities we discussed, while also discussing other native folklore such as deer woman or shape-shifting witches, all of which are relatively common motifs in the mythology of the region. What do you think it was? I told him about your channel and I sent him a couple of links. I'm sure he would like to hear your thoughts.
I don't know why I'm here. I shouldn't have come. I knew I shouldn't have accepted the dare. Well, I couldn't back down from a double dare, could I? My name is Jacob, but my friends call me Jake. My friends had dared me to come here at midnight to prove I wasn't a pussy. There was no way I could back down from a double dare, as everyone would know I was a coward. My friends and I were in the woods near our town, just messing around, teenage stuff. Our parents had always warned us to stay away from the woods, as anything could happen in there. Of course, We didn't listen to them. We were 15, and we thought we knew better than them, as every teenager does. Our town's woods are like any towns. Parents warn us not to go in as a child, leading us to create fantastical tales about creatures living in the woods who only come out at night with the body of a deer and torso of a man, with unicorns and dragons living in the deepest of the green utopia when the sky turns into an inky black. Of course, we outgrew all of these childish creations and fantasies, and we grew up to enjoy the woods, often going in there to enjoy a sneaky smoke, or to take their new girlfriend away from the prying eyes of their parents. We had entered the woods at just about 4 p.m. It was autumn, and the clouds were hanging low over the treetops, looking pregnant and black, threatening to burst and shower us in heavy rain that had been expected for weeks now. My friends, Sam and Archie, were with me. Archie is my best friend. Ever since we met in 2nd grade, we had gotten on like a house on fire, and now we were practically inseparable. Sam was a big dude, towering over us at 5'11", at just 15 years old. He was the guy you always wanted on your side when you got into a fight. Me and Sam didn't get on this very well. We had only met through a friend of a friend type thing and had never really bonded well. Sam was doing his usual bragging about the stuff he's got up to last night with his girlfriend that we all knew were just over-exaggerated fantasies. We had just arrived at the clearing. That was its name. Everyone just called it the clearing. It was exactly that, a clearing in the center of the woods, with a large boulder in the center, that as kids, when we walked through the woods with our parents, we would climb to the top and yell funny phrases from our favorite cartoon at the time. We walked where the boulder was at, and our conversation tuned towards movies. We had all recently seen a horror movie together, and were just making comments at how we each saw the other flinch at certain scenes. Both Sam and Archie were claiming that I was the only one who jumped the most. And of course, like any testosterone-driven teen, I was on the physical defensive immediately, jokingly pushing Archie off the rock and kicking him lightly. They both talked about how I was always a pussy when watching horror movies, always jumping at every shadow after the movie too. One thing led to the other, and before I knew it, I had been dared to prove that I wasn't the coward they were claiming I was. I had to stay in the woods with them until midnight, and then they would leave me alone for an hour to see how long I would last in the dark woods on my own. I was hesitating to accept it there, thinking of my parents and stuff, and it being a school night. But then Archie went and double dared me. You can't decline a double dare. I had to accept the challenge. We hung around, waiting for midnight to come. They continued their conversations, but I couldn't get involved. I was far too nervous, dreading the moment I would be left alone in these dark woods. They had promised me they wouldn't be too far off, and that they wouldn't be able to hear my girly screams, quote Sam, if I got too scared and wanted out of it. It wasn't the dark I was going to be scared of. It was what was unseen in the dark that worried me the most. My hands were shaking, and I couldn't stop my breathing rate to increase as the minutes ticked down to midnight. Just 10 minutes to go, 10 minutes, and then an hour standing in the pitch black woods in the clearing. Proving to my friends I wasn't a coward. Was it worth it? I asked myself. I didn't know. To live for the rest of my friendship with them, being called a pussy, or to stand through 60 minutes of sheer terror and dread. Damn it, I shouldn't have watched so many scary movies. My mind was a blur. My vision couldn't focus. I kept seeing things in the corner of my eye, shadows behind trees that moved out of sight when I turned my full attention on them. Footsteps behind me. I knew it was all my imagination though. Just my imagination. Hey, Archie's voice cut through the mist in my mind. A deer. I squinted through the darkness in the direction he was pointing. Where? I heard Sam ask. Shh, you'll scare it away, Archie hissed. He gestured with his hand to the left side of the boulder, middle distance. And sure enough, there was a deer. It was standing still, absolutely stock still. It wasn't grazing the grass. It was looking around for possible dangers or predators. It was just standing there, with its head pointed straight, looking east. It's beautiful, ain't it? Archie said, smiling at me. I nodded, my mouth still dry with nervous anticipation. I pulled out my phone to check the time, to see how long I had left before I was left alone in these woods. But Archie stopped me, grabbing my hand and shaking his head. No, he whispered. The light from the phone might scare it away. I put the phone away and squinted through the darkness again at the still, motionless deer. We stood there for a few minutes, watching it. It hadn't moved once. Yo, why isn't it moving? Sam asked. Then the deer moved. I saw it. Just as Sam had said those words, in his deep whisper, the deer turned its head to look at us. I felt a shiver go down my spine. I don't know why, but the way it had turned its head to look at us didn't seem right. The movement wasn't fluid. It wasn't like the deer was afraid of the noise and had whipped its head around to check it out. The deer had turned its head too slowly for an animal of prey hearing an unknown sound. It stared at us. We stared at it, and nobody moved. The woods were silent. It was as if the trees and animals were all holding their breath in anticipation of what was about to occur next. It then moved again, so slowly, so unnaturally, and slowly. It started to walk. I don't know if walk is the right way to describe its movements actually. It was more forced, as if its legs didn't belong to it and it was trying to figure out how to use its limbs along the way. Jerky and slow movements, moving away into the darkness until the blackness surrounded it and we could no longer see it. None of us said anything for a long time. Sam turned to us. He ruined it. Of course he would. Enough of that weird ass deer. We're here for a reason, right? I could do nothing but stare at him, my heart beating so fast in my chest, and my head swimming with thoughts. Archie didn't respond. Well, Sam demanded. Archie looked at me. I couldn't move. Fear had paralyzed me. I was scared of what I had just witnessed, and the strangeness of it, and the fear of the dare. Archie then shrugged at me. "A dare's a dare, bro," was all he said to me. Taking out his phone, he checked the time. 12:03, a little over midnight. "Well," Archie began, but Sam cut in. "Come on, let's get to it. It's bloody freezing out here." He pulled down his beanie further on his head and zipped up his coat higher. "Do the dare, and let's get home, where it's warm, alright?" I nodded. I couldn't believe myself. I actually nodded. Despite all my internal senses going haywire, all of my gut telling me that this was the complete and wrong thing to be doing, I had nodded, sealing the dare and confirming my participation. The dare was on. They promised me they wouldn't be too far away, that they would be near the creek at the west entrance of the woods, about 100 meters away from the clearing I was in. Then they left me all alone, alone in the dark, alone in the unknown, alone with who knows what. I silently cursed myself. I tried to control my breathing. My heart was hammering in my chest. I let out a sigh, watching as my breath vapor steamed the cold air in front of my face. I just had to make an hour. 1 hour. 1 hour. I walked to the boulder and leaned against it and waited and waited. And that's where I am right now, still waiting. I actually shouldn't be here. I know I shouldn't. I let out a sigh, taking out my phone, squinting at the sudden bright light of the display. I checked the time. 12:42, just 18 minutes. Time was going slowly. A loud noise interrupted me from my self-pitying thoughts. The sound of a twig snapping. Someone was moving near me. My eyes were wide, darting around trying to pierce the inky blackness of where my natural night vision couldn't see. I tried to swallow, but my mouth was too dry. The noise came again, this time from behind me. I spun around, trying to desperately squint through the darkness. I turned on my phone, turned on the flashlight, and shined it through the trees. It was Archie and Sam. I knew it. They were trying to prank me, try and make me scream, so then they could tell all of their friends that Jake was scared of the dark and was such a coward. My fist clenched tighter around my phone. "Archie, Sam, I know it's you," I called out. And the noise came again from my left. I whipped around and saw it. There was a deer standing there, looking at me. It was close, like 2 meters away from me. I could see its coarse fur and its twisting antlers, and its eyes were wrong. Its eyes were a deep, dark red. I stepped backwards. Those eyes, they had me transfixed. I couldn't stop staring into them. Then, the deer started to move, jerky movements, towards me. I was frozen in shock. I thought I heard a faint noise in the distance, some high-pitched noise, but it was for a split second, and I was left wondering if I had imagined it. The deer kept moving towards me, menacing, terrifying. I was paralyzed in fear. My body wanted to move, but I couldn't. All I could do was stand there as the deer kept stalking towards me so slowly. It wasn't a deer though. It was obvious. The eyes, the way it moved, the way it held its posture. It was clear that this was something else. What it was, I didn't know. It wasn't a deer for sure. Something was inside of it, wearing it, testing it out, and seeing how it worked. My body then came to life. I had control of my limbs, breaking free of its stare. I turned and fled. I wasn't paying attention to where I was running to, just anywhere from that. That thing, I looked behind me. It wasn't following me. It was standing in the clearing, watching me. I turned back to look where I was going. Too late. I tripped over a log, I think. My knees with pain. Pain seared through my left elbow. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the pain, and looked behind me. The woods were silent. The only thing I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat and my heavy breathing. I heard footsteps, pounding footsteps coming towards me. Sam burst through the foliage, panting. He couldn't speak. His chest was heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. His hair and face was slick with sweat, and he had lost his beanie on the run. It got Archie. It freaking got Archie, he managed to say. He noticed my look of confusion. The deer, the freaking deer. There was one there. We were watching it. I turned for a second, and when I turned back, Sam broke into a hacking sob. He broke down. Tears were rolling down his cheeks. I realized this was the first time I had seen the big guy cry. When I turned back, there were bones on the floor. The deer had gone, and there was this thing, this freaking ugly ass creature. It was horrible, dude. Sam broke down again. I could do nothing but stay crouched where I was, shocked out of my wits. It transformed in front of me, dude. It had taken his skin, like in the horror movies. Skinwalkers. They take the skins of their victims. More of them freaking deer showed up then. Like about 5 of them, dude. 5 of them. Next to the thing wearing Sam's skin. And then Sam coughed and spat onto the ground. I ran like hell, dude. Oh my god. This freaking there. We should have never stayed. His tears stopped coming, and he collapsed onto the log. I was breathing heavily still. I saw a deer too, I managed to whisper. It was in the clearing. I ran, 'cause it just didn't seem right. If I had stayed, I grounded to a halt. There was a deer walking towards us. Its eyes were red. Run! I yelled, leaping to my feet and grabbing Sam by the arm, dragging him with me. I could hear the deer following us. Then, a loud crunch, and I knew that if I looked back now, it wouldn't be a deer following us. It would be one of those creatures Sam had described. I didn't look back though, just kept running and running. Then we got lost. Branches whipped in our face. Foliage shredded our trousers. If one of us tripped, the other would simply keep going, dragging the other along with them until they got their pace back. We got split up. I don't even know how. I think there was a tree, and Sam was going around the left of it, but I was going to the right. I let go of his arm for a second, I think. When I looked to where he had been, he wasn't there. I had lost him. I kept running until I couldn't run any further. I staggered to a halt and leaned against a tree trunk, trying to catch my breath back. I took a step forward and heard a little brittle crunch from underneath my shoe. I stepped back and looked down at what I had stepped on. There was something white on the floor. I took my phone out and shined its flashlight on the floor. Bones. There were bones on the floor, shattered by me stepping on them. I shined the light around more. There was a skull near the bushes. I wanted to vomit. This must be all that was left of poor Archie. I sank to my knees and I started to sob. And I started to cry, uncontrollably, racking sobs. I fell onto my backside, but felt something underneath me. I sat up and picked it up. It was Sam's beanie. Then it clicked. I span around, and of course, there was Sam. But it wasn't Sam, of course. His pupils were red, and that smile wasn't right. The thing wearing Sam's skin forced Sam's grin even wider, and it said in a deep snarl,
"I dare you to run. Go on. Double dare."
I grew up in Winslow, Arizona, but also lived for a period of time on the reservation near the Puerco River. My grandparents have a home which is more to the east and not all that far from the New Mexico state line. When my mother and aunts were children, they lived further west. Their house was in a wooded area, and though there were neighbors, there wasn't that many. When I was young, I often heard stories of skinwalkers, but never really believed until I got older, and after my grandmother, a Christian woman, not prone to superstition or telling lies, shared with me and my cousins an encounter that occurred when my mother and her sisters, my aunts, were still small children. They were living at the time in a 3-bedroom house, full wood construction, surrounded by a small fence, and with chicken wire around the front porch. One night, when all the children are in bed, and my grandfather is off working, she is awakened by a noise that she hears outside. She gets up out of bed, and in the dark, makes her way out to the living room. It is then that she hears something up on the roof of the house. She said that she knows immediately what it is. Her first instinct is to go out to the front porch and curse the creature that has picked her and her family as a target. As she makes her way to the front door, she hears it walking around over her head. Then, as soon as she starts to open the door to go out, she hears it jump down by the side of the porch, open the porch door, come up to the steps, and right up to the kitchen window, only about 10 feet away from where my grandmother is standing. She says that she is really scared now, but as the porch light is on, she thinks that she can take a peek through the window and see what is out there. Just as she starts to pull aside the curtain, her whole body freezes, as if she has no control over it whatsoever. However, she can hear just fine, and whatever is out there on the porch starts to scratch at the kitchen window, as if it's trying to get into the house. My grandmother says she starts praying and asking God to make whatever it is go away, and this is before she becomes a Christian. Finally, the creature gives up and leaves. Once it is gone, my grandmother is able to move again. She says she knows it was a skinwalker. Her own mother had often shouted into the night, and her father would shoot with a shotgun into the darkness whenever a skinwalker came around their whole gun. The next morning, when my grandfather comes home from work, she tells him what happened. He takes the ladder and goes up into the roof and discovers a bundle of dry grass and twigs placed there alongside of the chimney. He tells her that the skinwalker might have wanted to start a fire in order to get her and the girls out of the house. Later that day, one of the older men from the reservation comes by the house and puts ash over the doorway. Even to this day, my grandmother swears that she knows who that skinwalker was. But what's more weird, or strange, is that she's never told us. And even now, she won't say who it was. In Arizona, there is an older woman who lives not far from my grandmother's house. She works about halfway to Gallup, New Mexico, maybe about 20 minutes away from my grandmother's house. On cold mornings, she gets up before the sun to start her car and let it warm up before she makes the drive. Her house is surrounded by a dark wood fence, which is about 5 feet tall. This one morning, as she is making her way out to the car, she hears voices that seem to be chanting and giggling. She thinks they are coming from over by this low hill to the east of her house and back from the road. She walks over to the fence and takes a look, but it's still dark and the hill is covered with trees and bushes. She doesn't see anything or anyone, and the voices have stopped. She doesn't give it another thought, goes about her usual morning routine, and eventually leaves for work. A few nights later, she is bringing in her laundry from the outside line when she hears really loud music coming from the neighbor's yard across the street. She decides to be nosy and walks over to the fence to see which one of the boys it is, thinking that maybe she can ask him to lower the volume some. Just as she gets to the fence, she sees a dark figure step from the trees on that low hill and make its way down towards the street. It's moving kind of funny, as if it's not accustomed to its own body. She screams, and it starts to run really fast towards the young man playing the boombox. He must have heard her, because she says he lowered the volume. However, when she turns back around to see where the figure has gone to, it's now gone. She says that she was certain that it was a skinwalker. There's an old crow story dating back to the turn of the 20th century about a man and his daughter driving their wagon along one of the back dirt roads of the reservation. They're on their way to the market. The daughter, about 10 years of age, notices an old woman up ahead. She is limping along the middle of the road and mumbling to herself. Just then, her father moves the horse pulling the wagon, and it breaks into a faster pace, trolling up alongside the old woman. As soon as the father is in reach, he raises his buggy whip and trashes the woman across the back. Then and there, right before the eyes of the little girl, the old woman withers down in size, turns into a coyote, and runs off into the trees by the roadside. Her father, not in the least bit surprised, turns to her and says, "Let that be a lesson to you." The canyons throughout the Four Corners, for those who don't know, Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico, Nevada fits in there too, are populated with signs and indications of the presence of the ancestors of the tribes native to the area. Most common are petrographs and petroglyphs, drawings on stones, the remains of cliff dwellings, and ancient roads, which seem to run to nowhere. There are also man-made structures of stone houses and temples. Most of these areas are accessible to visitors. However, they are also monitored by local and tribal authorities, which protect them and ensure their preservation. That being said, it is not uncommon to find graffiti and other evidence of disregard for these historical sites. Several years ago, a friend of mine, a local Hopi guide for the tourists, and I are poking around these ruins. It's already dark, but if you are going to go to these places for the reason we go, see if there's anything of value that hasn't yet been recovered. You have to go at a time you're likely not to be seen. I have gone to other similar places with this guy, and we had some luck with small relics that tourists will buy. By the way, I am Hopi as well. We are only there for a short period when we hear something moving towards the ridge and only a few yards from where we are. My friend takes a pistol from his waist and points it over to the trees. He's calling out in our native language some words we both know and which are generally used to ward off dark spirits. By the sound of things, whatever is out there is getting more bold and coming closer, but we still can't see anything. At the same time, there is this feeling of dread building up inside of me, and I'm thinking too how nice it would be to have a pistol instead of the flashlight that I am carrying. At this time, we're both thinking Skinwalker. But that's just part of who we are as Hopi. My friend then starts backing the two of us towards the edge, running up and over our heads. Just then, this sharp, yipping sound breaks out, followed by this sustained high-pitched scream, which slices right through me like an icy wind. I find myself praying before I realize I am doing it already. My friend is starting to chant in Hopi, his voice filled with fear. We both have no doubt it is a Skinwalker, and it is coming right at us. I lift my flashlight and point its bright beam in the direction of that blood-chilling screech. The Skinwalker, still in the dark, responds by making this throat mucus-filled sound, a sort of coughing noise. I am waving the light all around trying to get a glimpse of it. Just then, I guess my friend can't take it anymore and starts firing his pistol, the rounds tearing through the bushes. I drop for cover and duck my head, saying the Hail Mary the whole time. When he stops firing, I look up in time to see this dark shape run up the sheer slope of the ridge, just to the other side of the trees and brush. We didn't hang around to see where it went, leaving the ruins behind and getting back to our truck. So if you ever go anywhere near the Four Corners, don't stay past nighttime. And whatever you do, don't venture out into any native, man-made structures, temples, or anything related to ancient native tribes. You might just come across a Skinwalker. I myself am not Navajo, but my friend is. He grew up around Gallup, New Mexico. He loves to tell me stories about Skinwalkers. He knows it gives me the chills. According to him, they are not like werewolves, but are dark spirits that use the skins or even the flesh of anything living that may serve its purpose. They will also use animal parts as totems. For example, they will take the claws from a bear or the antlers from a deer. They are known to come after humans too, but he says that's a native thing and that white people have nothing to worry about. He says the only way to make it stop bothering you is to take away its disguise. The scariest story he tells is about this Navajo trucker that his father knows. Every night he makes the long run to the reservation from Gallup. One night, when halfway there, he hears a loud noise against the front passenger side of his truck. Thinking he might have hit something, he pulls off to the shoulder of the road to take a look, but he finds nothing, not even a mark or dent on the fender. So he gets back on the road and resumes driving. But only a few seconds later, he sees something in his rear view mirror towards the middle of the road and moving up on him. And it's not another vehicle. Then, just as suddenly as it appears, it's gone. Shrugging it off, he goes back to paying attention to the road, with his semi going about 60 miles per hour. He chances to look in his mirror, and again, he sees this thing chasing him, and it is moving fast. Just like that, it's at his driver's door, and holding onto the handle and striding along. Then, without warning, it turns to him with this dog-like face and dull, dark eyes, and smashes in the window. The driver slams on the brakes. The cab of the truck goes into a slide, the trailer jackknifing past him. The whole time, this creature is holding on to the door and reaching in through the broken window trying to grab him. Somehow, the truck comes to a stop, blocking both lanes of the road straight across. The driver is so scared, he doesn't even notice the creature is gone, and instead throws the door open and runs off into the desert. Now, he must have passed out or something, because he awakes with the sun coming up and finds himself huddled by this rock formation. He's dusty, a little dirty, and missing his shirt, but is otherwise unharmed. Sitting there getting his bearings, the events of the previous night come back to him. He gets up to his feet, dusts himself off, and walks out back to the highway, not knowing what to expect with his truck. However, as he reaches the road, he sees it parked as neat as it can be there on the shoulder. When he gets up to it, he sees there's nothing wrong with the driver's door window. It's as if he imagined the whole thing. He does notice, however, a series of small scratches on the driver's door all around the handle, as if something was clawing at it. These marks were not there previously. I heard of skinwalkers before, but I always assumed they were the Native American version of werewolves, so I never gave them much thought. Until last week, when one of my co-workers in my new job told me that they were his most feared folklore creatures. He's originally from Utah, so that makes sense. He suggested some YouTube videos to watch on the subject, and after work that night, I watched about 4 or 5 of the videos. Now, I totally understand his stance on them now. I live in South Carolina, so to be completely honest, I wasn't too worried about the possibility of running into one. My coworker told me that they were basically a Midwestern thing. I would be more worried about Wendigos if I were you. He joked the day after I watched the videos. We had a good chat about skinwalkers and Wendigos during our shift and just revel in the creepiness of them. I mentioned how one of the tales said that the more you talk about skinwalkers, the more they're drawn to you. And he made sarcastic ghost noises to keep the mood light. The night I showed the videos to my fiance, she was way more creeped out than I was. I became kind of obsessed. I love scary things and couldn't help but watch every video I came across. I talked about skinwalkers with my other friends who love horror, looked up skinwalker art, read true skinwalker stories on Reddit, just drove head first into all things about skinwalkers. This went on for a few days until I started feeling a little burned out on the subject. I live in a fairly nice neighborhood where all the houses are on one side of the street. On the other side is land that used to belong to the local elementary school. The building is on the next street over, so basically it was like the school's backyard or whatever. However, the school shut down about 30 or 40 years ago, and the county just let nature reclaim it. So directly across from my house is an old chain link fence and just overgrown woods. 2 nights ago, I was smoking a cigarette and I heard some leaves rustling across the street. I didn't bother looking up from my phone. I live across from the woods, so it must have been a deer. The rustling stopped, then it started again, and it sounded like whatever was over there was running back and forth along the fence line, panting like a dog. This, however, caught my attention. There had been a few cases of rabies in my town because of a strange dog that was running around in the middle of the night, and it was definitely something I wanted to keep my eye on. I look up from my phone in the direction of the sounds, and they just stopped. It was like the thing knew I noticed it. I strained my eyes trying to see what it was, but it was obscured by the overgrowth. I didn't look away, must have stared at the spot for at least a minute. It didn't make another sound, didn't move, so I knew it was still there. A chill ran down my spine, and I began thinking of every skinwalker video I had watched over the last week, and I felt sick to my stomach. I quickly put out my cigarette and went inside. The next morning, I took my dog out for a short walk. She's a pug zoo named Honey and is like my child. Me and my fiance taught her that pee-pee poo-poo means it's time to go outside to potty. It's the cutest thing. Anyway, this particular morning, I take her out to the front yard to do her business. She pees and then walks around sniffling for about 5 minutes before walking to the side of the street and sitting down. She's never done this before, so I was a little annoyed. I tugged on her leash lightly and tried to bring her back towards the house. Come on, honey, gotta poo-poo. She didn't budge. This dog could be stubborn sometimes, but this was something else. She tugged back against the leash and just stared across the street, sniffing the air occasionally. It was then at that moment that I realized she was staring at the exact spot that I had heard the thing the night before. I got goosebumps, and I quickly picked her up and began walking back to the house. As I got closer, I noticed something on the ground by my front steps. It was one of the Halloween decorations my fiance had put up on our house. Plastic black roses with plastic eyeballs and spiders on them. The stems were wire, so they can be wrapped around things to keep them secure. This flower was torn apart. Something had come into my porch, taken down the flower, and torn it apart, leaving it in the front of my steps. I picked up the flower and threw it away. I didn't tell my fiance. I didn't want her freaking out. The rest of the day went by uneventfully. That night, I told my coworker about what happened, and he looked a little concerned, but brushed it off. He said what I heard was most likely just a dog, and the flower was most likely knocked down by the wind. I had my doubts. As I was walking to my door after getting home from work last night, I heard some panting as the night before, and the clicking of claws against asphalt. I turned quickly to see a dog that looked like a brown mangy bull terrier hauling ass down my street. The street is about 40 feet away from my front porch, so I couldn't get a great look at it, but I could tell it was only running on 3 legs because one looked mangled. It turned quickly and darted into the tree line across the street through a part of the fence that had been pulled back. The fence wasn't like that earlier in the day, and that's when I noticed that the dog didn't have a tail. I almost threw up. Skinwalker legend says that when they take the form of an animal, they never have tails. I tried to rationalize it to myself. Maybe it just had a stub tail that I missed because it was running. However, I immediately went inside. My fiance was sitting on the couch petting Honey. She could see I was upset and asked me what was wrong. I told her nothing, just almost got clipped by a car before I pulled into the driveway. She got up, hugged me, and cursed the person that almost hit me. She then asked me if I could take Honey out for pee-pee poo-poo because she had been creeped out by all the spooky videos we've been watching and didn't feel comfortable going outside at night by herself. Honey perked up. She ran to the door and looked between me and the door all excited. I stared down at her for a moment before agreeing to it. I'll just keep her close to the porch, I thought. We walked off the porch and she quickly tried to walk to the street. I tugged on the leash and she tugged back. She eventually moved to the edge of the porch and peed. After she began walking around sniffing, I told her the usual line. Come on, honey, gotta poo-poo. She huffed at me, sniffed around some more, and eventually started pooping. I was on the edge the entire time we were outside, but being around her
helped me calm down just a little. Then I heard it from across the street. "Come on, honey." My voice, in the exact same tone and inflection as I had just said it. It sounded staticky, like an old radio broadcast, but it was definitely my voice. Honey then stopped what she was doing and stood alert. She looked over to me and cocked her head. "Come on, honey, gotta poo-poo." Again, my voice called from across the street. Honey began whining, looking from me to the woods across the street. I picked her up and I began backing up to the steps, not taking my eyes off the part of the fence that had been pulled back. "Honey, come." The voice sounded firm now, like it was getting aggravated. Honey squirmed in my arms, whining. I didn't know if she was trying to get out to go to the voice or to run inside, but I wasn't taking any chances. I turned and bolted up the steps and to the door. As I walked inside, I turned one last time to look across the street. There, standing in the part of the fence that was pulled back, was the dog. Its eyes were glowing a dull orange, and it had its teeth bared. The face was all wrong, like someone had taken a distortion tool and just dragged around random features. Once again, I didn't tell my fiance. Stupid horror movie cliche shit, I know, but I really didn't want her losing her shit. I just told her there's a strange dog running around the neighborhood, so to not take Honey out at night. Later that night, after we had gone to bed, I woke up to the sound of footsteps pacing back and forth outside my window. Against my better judgment, I rolled over to try and see it, and then the pacing stops. "Come on, honey." My voice called out, cutting through the quiet of the night. I prayed my fiance didn't hear it. It called out 2 more times before I heard it walking away. I didn't sleep a wink the rest of the night. Today, when I get to work, I'm going to ask my co-worker what I can do to get rid of this thing. I'm scared. I don't think there's a way. But if anyone knows anything, please let me know. Come on, honey. I'm having a hard time remembering the stories told to me by my Navajo family, but when I Skype with them again, I will ask. This creepy set of events happened directly to me. So here goes. My first personal encounter. It's lengthy, but hey, skinwalkers. They require a backstory. It started when my 2 brothers, David and Luke's girlfriend, Sarah, all drove down to the desert to spend some time in the country. This is a reservation land, as it were, so there was red dirt everywhere. Southern Utah, a beautiful place if you ever get a chance. We had some pistols and decided to go out and do some target practice. We took our gear and some old targets to a place called Devil's Heartbeat. I had never been there, but all 3 of them were familiar with the area. It was a canyon about 200 feet deep. We stayed on one end of the canyon. About 50 feet over, the opposite side of the canyon rose up above us, Anasazi ruins. The Navajo may disagree with historians on the Anasazi's origins and departure. According to Navajo legend, they simply disappeared from existence, leaving behind plates, dishes, and food, and went into another dimension or some equivalent. But Whatever the history, the Navajo do not like to wander in Anasazi ruins. I have never asked why, but I figured it has something to do with disrespect, preserving history, etc. As such, none of the others cared a bit about these canyon ruins. They were more interested in shooting pistols. I could see old beds and even cave drawings on the cliffs with my naked eye, and I got this strange fixation on going over there. I'm not Navajo, and I felt that their rules didn't apply to me. I set off down the cliff without rope and decided I would climb down, cross the canyon floor, and then climb back up. This was a bad idea for a million reasons, but it was somewhat of a obsession. I can't explain the feeling. It was like magnetism. I wanted to be in those ruins, and it wasn't just some tourist-like curiosity. It felt like I was meant to go there. I kept slipping and getting stuck on the rocks, and I was so frustrated I almost started crying. Finally, I was deterred by the unmistakable sound of a growl coming from the canyon floor below me. There were trees down there, so I couldn't see what was making that noise. A mountain lion immediately rose to mind, and I got my ass back up to the cliffside. I said nothing to the others, and we shot the guns for a while. The only other strange occurrence was while Sarah was aiming, things got really quiet. We all heard a sound from behind us, maybe 20 feet away. It was almost like a growl, then a hoarse laugh, almost like a lion, and then a hyena. We had a clear view of the entire area, and there was nothing there. At least, not on the cliff tops, where we heard it anyway. The creepy part was that while David, Sarah, and I all heard it from a close distance, Luke heard the exact same noise right by his ear. We ended up camping out there to see if anything would happen, and this is when I got completely terrified. Before, I was only scared of wild animals. Even though we had guns, we were sleeping with no bags or tents. All we had were some blankets under the stars and a little fire, so I felt safe when we all lay down. I fell asleep pretty quickly, but woke up a few hours later to see everyone else laying down with their eyes open wide, listening. The canyon was completely full of noises. The only way to describe it is people banging rocks together. There would be one set, maybe 300 yards away, then another clacking 200 yards away, and then 50 yards away. The canyon echoes, so it was hard to tell exactly how many rock smacking rock noises there was, but they sounded like Morse code. We listened to this for maybe 10 minutes. No other animal noises. Nothing. Finally, David, who is kind of a hard ass and the least superstitious of his family, shouted, "Shut up!" And everything, I mean everything, immediately stopped. My heart was in my throat. We just sat there and stared at each other, wide-eyed. It was dead quiet. And then another super weird noise from the Anasazi ruins. I don't know how to explain this one either, but it sounded kind of like a zebra noise, like these squeaky thrills. It got louder, and then the rocks, sticks, whatever started up again. But this was worse, because now other animal noises came. We heard what sounded like wolves or coyotes barking, monkeys screeching, owls hooting, and through it all, that terrible zebra noises. We said nope and got our happy little asses out of there immediately. It took us maybe 10 minutes to douse the fire, pack our blankets,
and speed away, and the noises continued that entire time. That night, I was obviously pretty shaken up. Before I could fall asleep again, my Navajo mother came and sat by me, and she said that she could tell I had a rough day. We hadn't mentioned the creepy shit to avoid a lecture about fucking with the spirits. She asked me about it, and I ended up spilling my guts about not seeing the canyon ruins. It was something personal, it felt like. I wanted to go there. Why couldn't I go there? It would have been beautiful. After I told her all about it, I could see that she had a really concerned look on her face. "What is it?" I asked, totally confused, and she explained something I had no idea about. The spirits in the ruins like to draw people up. When they get up on the ground, the spirits push them off. That's why we don't go there. I remained creeped out for the remainder of the visit. Fast forward a few weeks later, I worked at a shitty call center in Salt Lake City, third shift. It was my first night being alone, and I was feeling jumpy. My brothers already warned me that I had a Skinwalker following me, but I, of course, didn't believe it. I don't smoke, but I follow my coworkers out for smoke breaks because I like to chat. Tonight, I lurked in the doorway because I had this horrible cloud of dread hanging over me. I was peeping out the glass door and being a total weirdo. It hit me then how paranoid I had been, and that's when I remembered that's what Skinwalkers do. They mess with your mind. While I was pacing in front of the glass door, I decided that this whole thing was fucking stupid, and I was gonna go outside and stand there for the rest of my 10-minute break. Most of the smokers were already filling back in, but I walked out and put my hands in my pockets, looked at the sky, looked in the building, mentally patting myself on the back for not being a pussy. Then I saw something that I will never, ever be able to give a rational or even halfway accountable explanation for. We have like 6 parking lots, and one of the lots far away from me, maybe around 100 feet, I could see something walking. It was a dog, obviously, but it was almost limping and walked like it was tired or hurt. Me being the animal lover, forgot all about Skinwalkers, and I started walking towards it, making the "come here doggy" noises, and then I stopped. That's when I saw it. The dog had the body form of a greyhound, and it was gray, but there was something very wrong with it. It had bloody legs, and it was limping, but it walked more like a person would, on feet and hands. Its butt was moving to and from, if that makes any sense. When it heard me getting close, it just stopped without turning, something I had never known any dog to do. And finally, it looked over its shoulder at me. And this is the freaky part. This dog was looking at me the way a person does. It had huge eyes, way too big for a greyhound, and its teeth were barred like it was considering biting me. Then it growled, but it was like a whistle growl, noises no animal makes. It almost sounded like it wanted to talk, or like if it was taunting me. Somehow, in the middle of all this, I realized it didn't have a tail. And I knew and heard from all the Navajo stories that Skinwalkers, when they appear as animals, don't have tails. Forgetting all logic and rationality, I turned and took off. I didn't look back until I was back inside the building and had pulled the door shut behind me. And by then, when I looked, of course, the fucking thing was gone.
When I described this to my brothers, they were absolutely sure it was a skinwalker, and they went through the trouble of blessing me, my apartment, blessing them and their apartments. I never saw the creepy bloody dog again, and I have never, since even slightly, wanted to visit the cliff ruins. Just to give some background, this happened in the mountains, near El Cerro de Tomé. Okay, so Friday, 1:28 a.m., me and my friends decided to go for a drive. We sometimes like to go to the Llano, mountains near El Cerro, to experience something that only happens in that area, paranormal and supernatural. Like any other time we do this, we go in my car and drive past Dome Hill, going towards the mountains, and park across from VHS. Then we sit and take in the scenic beauty of the dark desert. We started by listening close to anything and looking everywhere, being hyper observant. At first, we saw a light in the distance, getting within about a mile away from us, then disappearing altogether. We then decided to move on from there because we had to, and I mean had to, see something else. We were driving through roads and flying by at least 30 miles per hour over the speed limit. We then turned down a familiar road. This is the road we knew that something was about to change me and everyone else. It was 4 of us in total. We looked to the right side of the car, saw what we all believed to be something like a hellhound or maybe a skinwalker, when this massive black dog just launched at my vehicle while I was going 45 through the road. We should have felt impact from this massive creature, but we didn't. We then stopped the vehicle, and both people in the back seat looked and saw this thing rise up from the ground. It rose up from the ground and stood straight up on 2 legs, absolutely huge. It was all black with red eyes that are forever imprinted in our minds. I then slammed on the gas, and we sped up to about 55. We took off so fast, and as I looked in my rear view mirror, I could see it. Huge fucking coyote, standing on 2 legs, looking at us as we're driving away. Okay, so I've been a skeptic of creepy paranormal things my entire life. I have never believed in that type of stuff, but the things I have heard, witnessed, at my grandparents' farm shakes me to my core. My grandparents own a large plot of land in central Missouri, and they have owned that land for around 40 years. I've been to that farm over 10 times, and every time I go, I always get this terrifying feeling that something is watching me. Like, there's always something behind my back. I have also had many strange encounters there that are downright bizarre. My first encounter with whatever the hell this thing was when I was around the age of 7 or 9. I'm currently 14. We had brought our dog named Spot to that farm. He was a silver lab who I loved dearly. I was exploring the forest behind the house, just enjoying the summer breeze, when my dog started growling. A deep, sinister growl that I had never heard him make. I turned around quickly to see what he was growling at, but I couldn't see anything but forest among more forest. While my eyes were scanning the area of where my dog was growling, some animal shot out of the brush so fast
I could barely see what it was, and before I knew it, it was gone. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, absolutely flabbergasted by what I just witnessed. From what I could see of it, it looked like a coyote, but the speed at which it moved was absolutely insane. It moved like at 90 miles an hour and made almost no noise. But the most creepy part was that the place it jumped out of didn't even make an imprint of where it was laying. And from where I viewed it jumping up, I should have been able to easily see where it was hiding. Shocked by what I witnessed, I just decided that was enough and went back inside the house. My second encounter happened when I was around 10. I was visiting the place, and like usual, I was getting the feeling I was being watched. At first it was normal, and nothing really creepy happened. I was just spending quality time with family. But when night came, that's when shit started happening. I was trying to sleep in the twin bed that was shared by my mom's brother when he used to live there. That's when I heard tapping. Not tiny little taps, but loud tap, almost like it was banging. It was coming from the direction of the window. I slowly sat up and looked at the window, but there was nothing. So I assumed it was just some animal or something like that. 5 minutes passed and no tapping, and I was drifting off to sleep when, this time, not a tap, a slam, a loud slam directly into the window. I'm not talking about like a hit. It sounded as if something absolutely massive hit the window. I shot up so quickly, I nearly passed out. I decided enough was enough and grabbed the flashlight in the drawer and shined it out the window. Nothing. 10 seconds passed. Nothing. I was about to go crawl into my mom's bed when I heard it. A screech. A screech that was not achievable by any human. So loud it pierced the quiet, peaceful summer night. I can't put into words what that sound sounded like, but it was dark and horrible, and I still remember it to this day. I froze, unable to move muscle. I was so scared. I was sitting there still as a statue, petrified by what I heard. That's when my instincts kicked in, and they told me to run into my mom's room, which I did. For some reason, I didn't wake her up. I just cuddled up next to her and didn't sleep the entire night. All I could think of was that sound, that horrific, terrible, bloody screech. My next encounter was when I was around the age of 13. I was back at my grandparents', just enjoying my time, like I always do. My grandpa suggested that we go deer watching. I agreed because I had been doing this since as long as I could remember. And it was never an issue, and it was extremely fun. So we took the Polaris, and we went around 6 to 7 p.m. to look for deer. We decided to go into the most eastern pasture, because that's usually where we spotted the most deer. 30 minutes passed, and we had seen a few deer, but not as much as we usually do. But then, this is where the shit begins. I get that feeling again, that dreadful feeling that something is there, in the shadows, watching me. But this time, it's a lot more intense. Like if it's right up behind me, but when I look, it's never there. But this time, it appears that my grandpa feels the same presence as me too. And just to let you all know, my grandpa is a very laid-back individual, always joking and having a laugh. The only time I've seen him be very serious is when my great uncle died a couple of years ago. So when I started feeling that I'm being watched, my grandpa goes from a happy and laid back expression to very serious and alert. He gripped the wheel so tight, his knuckles turned white, and he was just looking around like to make sure something wasn't following us. He then made a massive U-turn out of nowhere and started heading back to the house. I asked him, "What are you doing?" And he replied with, "We're heading back to the house." The tone of his voice was cold, like he had witnessed someone being murdered. At this point, he was gripping the wheel even harder and was absolutely going pedal to the metal full speed back to the house. I decided not to ask any questions until we got back to the house, which we did in no time at all. Once we were there, he rushed me into the house, checking his bag to make sure something wasn't there. When we were inside, he closed and locked the door tight. His behavior was very alarming, and it really shocked me to my core. I then decided that all of the stuff I had witnessed was enough, and I only asked him one question: "What the hell is going on here?" When I said that, he looked at me and gave me a cold expression and said, "I have some things I need to explain to you." We then sat down for 30 minutes, and he explained that whatever this thing was, it was living on his property, and it has been here since the day he moved in, and he and my mother experienced the same thing that was happening to me the very first few years of living here. He explained that he has seen whatever this thing is, and it doesn't like new visitors. He told me about all the things he had witnessed and experienced, and they seemed to have been pretty similar to what was happening to me. He told me that he knew this was going to happen to me, and that he was always watching to make sure I never got hurt, because he knew this creature better than anyone else. We talked some more, but all of it was the same. It was now late, and he decided that I couldn't sleep alone, so he had me sleep with my mom. We promptly left the next morning. I have not been back since that day. This last encounter isn't really an encounter. Two things have happened at my grandparents' farm. Recently, we brought my sister's horse to the farm. The first night for the horse was hell. My sister's horse has always been very friendly and not shy, but the first night of my sister's horse being at the farm was bizarre. The next morning, my grandpa woke up and was doing his usual chores and went to go feed the horse. He noticed that the horse was acting very weird, extremely shy and timid, but when he took a better look, he was shocked. The horse had 3 10-inch gashes down its side, like something had clawed at it. It was ruled out that the horse ran into the fence, but I think otherwise. Also, around the same time, my grandparents adopted a dog and named it Panda. Panda was a Jack Russell Terrier who was 2 months of age. 5 days later, he was found dead with deep puncture wounds on his body and with his neck slashed up. They said it was a bobcat or mountain lion, but I also think otherwise. Super creeped out by my experience I had over the weekend and curious what others think. I was driving through a rural part of North California, 30 miles from the nearest town. As I was driving down the road, a deer ran out in front of my car. I had no reaction time, and I hit it at 55 miles per hour. It ripped my bumper off, and the bumper was dragging under my car. I pulled over and called my dad for help. I then get out to look for a deer in the road. I know it was dead because there was blood sprayed all over my vehicle and I hit it square on. I walked around 20 to 30 yards away and I got an overwhelming sense of being watched. I couldn't find the deer, so I turned and speed walked back to my car. It was around 7 p.m. and it was extremely dark. No other vehicles were driving by, no street lights, and barely any cell service. My dad was over an hour away, so I called a friend who lived a little closer, and he started on his way to me. While I sat in the car playing on my phone, I began to hear whistling and murmurs outside my car. I got chills, and the hair on my arms and neck stood up. There was one house to my right, but I didn't see any vehicles in the driveway or people moving around inside. I was on the side of the road by myself for 45 minutes and would occasionally hear these noises. I'm not sure what or who it was, but if anyone has any ideas, I would love to hear. I'm freaked out, and I'm now scared of being outside in the dark by myself. Thanks.
My roommate has told me the story a few times, and I want to see if anyone else has had similar experiences. As he tells it, he was driving home super late at night, maybe around 3 or 4 a.m. in a suburb of Phoenix, Arizona. Both times that this occurred. The first time, he was driving alone on a road that has an open field to the left of it, when out of nowhere, a black figure on all fours bounds up out of the field, comes up out of the field and across the road in front of his car. As soon as the figure got to the other side of the road, it stops with inhuman quickness, turns around, and looks directly at my roommate. He described the figure as looking simian, completely black, except for the face. The creature's face was a stark, white, human face. Not white as in Caucasian, but white as snow. This happened again a few weeks later, but this time, the creature was sitting in a tree. As his car approached, it climbed down the tree, again with quickness, bounded across the road, stopped on a dime, and turned around and made eye contact with him. This time, he had a friend in the vehicle who also saw it and began freaking out. It was the same exact thing as the first time. A simian black body with a snow white, expressionless human face. My roommate, as always the curious one, turned the vehicle around and began searching for the creature, but it was nowhere to be seen. While trading stories around a campfire, my friend recalled an encounter he had while serving an LDS mission. My friend's mission region had a reservation within its boundaries. However, it was far from where he was serving. On one occasion, him and his mission companion were told to travel more far than usual to meet with some investigators. This, however, took them near the reservation. On their way home, their car ran out of gas, and it wasn't until late at night that they were able to continue the journey home. My friend, who was driving while his companion slept in the passenger seat, chose a different route that took him through some back roads in an attempt to try to get home sooner. He told us he was driving above the speed limit
when he noticed movement in the woods lining the road. Because coyotes were common in the area, he took little notice first. Then he looked out the window and slammed on the brakes. The sudden stop made his companion awake, who wanted to know what was wrong. My friend was shaken and said he would tell him once they got home. He only told him to say a prayer. By the time they made it home, his companion was dying to know what happened, and my friend told him. As I was driving, I looked down at the road next to the vehicle, and I saw 6 men running on all fours, keeping up with the car. I was driving 40 miles per hour. This is my father's story, written from his perspective. When I was about 11 or 12, we lived in a small house made of mud and stone. A lot like our house now. It was 2 of my brothers and I in the house. Everyone else had gone to the Hymas festival and left us to tend the sheep. We were getting ready for bed when we heard the dogs going crazy outside, thinking it was nothing more than coyotes howling in the distance. We screamed at them to be quiet. We began to fall asleep, and the dogs would not be quiet. Somehow, I was able to go to sleep for a few hours. Then, I woke up very late in the night. It was very quiet and still in the house, except for my brother's snoring. I then realized I needed to use the bathroom, so I woke up my brother to take me to the outhouse in the back. He teased me about being scared, which I was. We went out with our flashlight to the outhouse. The dogs then began with their crazy barking out in the brush, going from one place to the next. My brother went first, and I waited outside for him. While I was waiting, I tried to follow the dogs with my flashlight. Then, there was a very loud whine from one of the dogs. Everything went quiet again. It was way too quiet for that time of the year. Not even the sheep were making noise. Suddenly, I heard a few of the dogs by the truck. When I looked over, there was this man. He was unbelievably tall, leaning one arm on the cab roof of the truck. He was looking at the dogs for a little bit, and then suddenly kicking one of them, making them scatter in different directions. The thing then looked up at me, and I saw its face. It had a pure white face, like a full moon, 2 burning red eyes, and a slight smile that was pure black. I could not move or make a sound. It began to walk towards me with long strides until it finally towered over me. All I began to see was dark red, like the color of the blood when you cut the throat of a sheep. I kept getting deeper and deeper into its eyes. I could faintly hear my brother coming out of that outhouse. With this, the thing looked up at him. Reality came rushing back to me. I noticed that my brother was too distracted with his buckle to realize what was going on. I also noticed that this thing had long hands, hovering just inches from my head. Its skin was black ash, and he smelled like a bloated, dead animal in summer. I was still unable to move or speak. The Skinwalker began to move towards my brother. Finally, noticing this figure, my brother became paralyzed, as I was. Closer and closer it drew, reaching an arm out towards my brother's head. When something finally snapped in me, I became unbearably angry. I broke from this trance and lunged at the Skinwalker, raising my arms like a wild animal and baring my teeth at it. A growl came out that I never knew I could make. I became more and more angry at the thing that was trying to hurt us. It kept that smile at first, but the angrier I got, the more the smile faded. Finally, with everything I had, I began to make this primal roar at it. It fell backwards and ran away into the night. Looking back at me, its eyes were dim and dull, its smile now long gone. The next morning, the family returned home from the festival. After telling the story to my parents, they quickly hired a medicine man.
I'll never forget that night. I am a park ranger, and that is all you will learn about me, aside from this story. During the summer of 2008, I had been assigned to a watchtower in the middle of a heavily forest area. Most nights, it was uneventful, and I tended to just read a book as I waited for my shift to end. However, this night, when I started my shift, the guy I took over from was shaken up. Concerned, I asked what was wrong. All he did was shake his head and said, "There are things in the woods." He didn't say anything else and just left me standing there like a jackass jerk. Well, I set up for the night and took out my book. It was The Mailman, and I found myself surprised by how much I enjoyed it. Sometime around an hour into my shift, something struck the window. I jumped up and quickly sat the book down. Before checking it out, I had expected it was either a big bug or some poor bird. It was a bird, alright, but not what I had been expecting at all. This bird was dead long before it had collided with the window, both wings torn right off and stripped of all feathers. It was bound together with straps made from long grass blades. This was the clear evidence that this was man-made. I quickly took out my flashlight and began scanning the area beneath me. I couldn't see much through the woods. However, as I did a quick double take, I swear I saw a dark shape dart away from the light. I feel this needs some elaborating. I could barely make out anything, but when I brought my light over this thing, I only got a brief glimpse. I literally couldn't describe it for the life of me. This thing was fast, too fast. Alright, listen up, you punks. If you're out there, show yourself right now. I used my most commanding voice possible. Nothing. As I drew my pistol, I heard the radio crackle. Naturally, I went to check and picked up the receiver. As I held it up to my ear, I could only hear static, so I at first assumed it was a glitch. But right as I decided to set it down, something stopped me. Call it intuition, something just wasn't right. And then I realized what it was. I could hear something over the radio. It was faint, so I really had to strain to hear it. Slowly, I could make out what sounded like faint, low humming. There was a pattern to it, a steady beat that started low, building up, then carefully dropped back down in an instant. I don't know how long I was listening to that humming sound, but eventually I turned off the radio, ready to radio it in. Then I realized I could still hear the humming. Without a second thought,
I drew my pistol and turned around on my heel before steadily walking back outside. That humming sound sounded like it was all around me, following that same pattern. I still had to strain to make it out, but there was no question it was there. I swiveled around, pistol aimed at empty air. Every part of me was screaming to call for backup, but I wasn't sure what I needed backup for. I needed some proof of what I was dealing with, so I waited, on guard and ready, and then it stopped. As I became accustomed to the silence, I couldn't hear anything, not even a bug chirping. Cautiously turning my flashlight back on, I pointed it down at the base of the tower. Nothing whatsoever. Then I heard a creak. I immediately spun around, processing this information. At first, I dismissed it as the wood, but then there was another creak, and another. Something was up here with me. It took me a few moments to realize that it was just around the corner. In that moment, fight or flight kicked in full gear, and I chose fight. I rounded the corner and found nothing, absolutely nothing. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I was nervous, but I still had a job to do, and with no other option, I decided to call for backup, which I should have done that a long time ago. I realized that when I saw the receiver had been cut right off, I stared, dumbfounded by a few moments before grabbing my walkie-talkie instead. But when I turned it on, all I got was a harsh whine right in my ear, which caused me to drop it as I recovered. Once I had, I immediately tried to find it, but it was gone. My situation was desperate. I was now completely cut off with some thing or other that seemed to defy all sense. If I was going to make it out of this, I had to stay put and wait for someone to come check on me. I still had my pistol drawn, waiting and waiting. I then quickly shined my flashlight outside one last time, and this time I finally saw them, standing among the trees, staring up at me. They had been avoiding me all this time, so to see so many of them, you might be wondering what they were, and I'd rather not tell you for my sake. I was at my limit then, and screamed, turning off my flashlight and pointing my gun right at the door. There, I stayed for the rest of my shift, unwilling to move from that spot. I consider it a miracle I lasted for the rest of my shift. By the time someone finally arrived to see why I wasn't checking in, I poured out every single thing I had gone through. At first, the other ranger looked at me like I was crazy, but when he asked if I had any proof, something landed on the roof of his vehicle. It was another dead, naked, and wingless bird wrapped in grass. Needless to say, we booked it right out of there. When I got back and made a report about what happened, I demanded to speak with the last guy who had been on the previous shift. I really wanted him to have it for not warning me of what was out there. But here's the thing, we never found him. We searched high and low, checked every single record for a trace. We tried to look up his name, when we could remember it, but it seemed like he never existed in the first place. So, what the hell took his shift? I live right next to a Navajo reservation,
and have made friends with many of the people there my age. We like to hang out, play video games, and just be normal teens. I walk over a lot since my best friend lives a little less than a mile away from me. This isn't a long trek, and it only takes about 25 to 30 minutes. I have made this trip dozens of times and have grown very comfortable with it. I know the people along the way, so I'm not scared or on edge. There is a patch of forest, however, about midway there. It's a little unnerving sometimes. There is always that feeling of being watched. This was a regular occurrence for me, so I try to just ignore it and shake it off as my mind playing tricks on me. This day, I spent more time at my friend's house than I meant to, and when I left, it was already getting dark. I reached the stretch of forest right as the sun disappeared from the sky. I shivered a little as I readied myself to begin the journey through. I was 10 steps in when I heard a branch snap. You know the sound, the one that screams, there is definitely someone or something there with you. I froze, not sure what I should do next. Should I run? Should I turn around and book it back to my friend's house? I didn't know the best option in this situation, so I whispered, "Hello?" Hearing my voice crack as the words fell from my lips, I don't know why I even opened my mouth, but it was out there, so I listened for any reply. My heart sank when the answer came back in the sound of my voice. "Hello?" My heart pounded against my chest. I felt like I was gonna faint. "Hello?" My voice came again, but not from my mouth. I wanted to run, but my feet felt cemented to the ground. I couldn't scream. I couldn't reply. "Hello? Hello? 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 Hello?" as my voice echoed over and over from a short distance away. I couldn't pinpoint exactly where it was coming from. It sounded like it was everywhere around me. "Hello? Hello? 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 Hello?" It repeated. "Stop it!" I finally managed to tear from my lips. Everything went silent. For a long minute, nothing happened. The air grew stale, and I realized for the first time that there was no typical forest sound. There were no bugs, no frogs, or crickets. Nothing. I stood there, terrified, waiting to see what would happen next. "Stop it!" it mimicked back. I had enough and was wielding my heavy legs to move. Before I could take a step, I heard some rustling in the bushes 20 feet to my left. I watched as a deer head with huge antlers protruded through the bush as it came further out and stood up on twos. I took off. I flew out of the woods and all the way home in record time. I said nothing to my mom when I got there. I just went up to my room, laid down, and thought about what happened. My mom came in at some point and asked me if everything was alright. I replied yes, I was just tired. I don't know why I didn't tell her. I guess I was afraid of how she would react. I called my friend and told him everything. He freaked out and told me that no matter what happened that night, to not reply or look out my window. But this terrified me even more. He said to call him the next morning and he would explain more, and that he had to speak to his grandfather as soon as possible. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I stayed awake, listening to every little sound the night brought. Around 3 a.m., just as I was about to drift off, the air changed. The night sounds got quiet. I felt my heart begin to pound. I lay there and waited, pulling the covers over my head like a child, far too scared to move. It came after a long moment, Hello? I cried. It was all I could do. Hello? Stop it! It mocked what I had said in the woods again. It was terrifying enough when it copied what I said. But then, it did something new. It called my name. Amy. My mother's voice. Amy! Amy! Come here! Hello? Stop it! My voice again. For the rest of the night, the creature outside my window called my name in my mother's voice and repeated what I said in the woods over and over. In the morning, when the sun broke through the dark, it finally stopped. I fell into a deep sleep. I woke up around 12 to my friend calling to tell me he had spoken to his grandfather and could explain what happened to me. He said there was a creature that they called yenaglooshi, or he who goes on all fours, or a skinwalker. He explained that it was an evil witch that used dark magic to transform into an animal with the attributes it required, and that this witch had caught my scent and knew me now. I was also given a warning that since it knew me, it would always follow me, and that I would always have to be careful. Last night, I heard scratching on my window. Then, a low hum. The creature began saying my name again, but also adding in things I hadn't said in my mother's voice. At one point, it started calling my name, but drawing it out really far, like Amy. It tried to get me to come outside or to open the door and let it into my house. This went on all night. At this point, I feel like I'm going crazy. I don't know what to do. Is this thing seriously going to stalk the shadows around me for the rest of my life? I don't think I can take that. Many of you who love paranormal stuff may have already heard of the word nagual here in Mexico, and I would guess that also on some other countries in Latino America we call that way people who can shapeshift into animals. Well, here's my story. It was a cold night. I remember because it was really weird for it to get cold on that side of the country. This was in my parents' house in a small pueblo or small town, and back in the day it was one of the last houses outside of town. Not so many neighbors, but a lot of trees and nature around. The house has a long backyard where we used to have sheep. At one side, a small water stream and trees to the other side. The sheep then started to bleat very loud, something we could call screams. My father then went to give a check on a window in the back side of the house. I still recall his face when he came back quickly, and in a low, urgent voice, he told my mom, "Ve agarra a tu padre y a tus hermanos y diles que vengan ya ahorita. Go ask your father and brothers to come here immediately." They were 4 brothers, my grandfather and my father. When everyone was there, a few minutes later, my father started to tell us what he saw. In the barn, we had 10 sheep. At the moment my father gave a look, all of them were together in just one corner. At the center, there was some kind of big animal. My father described it as a bear, which makes totally no sense, but he said it was big, hairy, and it seemed to be eating one sheep there. This one sheep was screaming really bad. Then my grandfather told my mom to keep us inside of the house and to keep me in there also with her. If you go outside now, you may catch a bad air. So he made some kind of prayer,
holding his machete. So his prayer, I remember he said the names of my uncles and also my father's. He then went outside. That's when my grandfather started to yell at the darkness, telling things like, "Vete de aquí, no tienes nada que ver aquí, deja esta casa, go away, you have nothing to do here, leave this house." My father told me that he saw how this thing was in a pose, eating the sheep, which was laying on the ground, still screaming by the way, and when my grandfather yelled at it, this thing seemed to stop and raise its head up towards my family. This thing was only staring at them. Not a single noise, and also no red or shining eyes, only the shadow looked like it was looking at them. So my father decided to do something at last. He took a big rock, he picked it up from the ground and threw it at this thing. Maybe not the best thing to do in this situation, but I guess this thing was not that strong. Or maybe because it was 6 of us and we all had machetes. But when the rock hit it, this being turned its back and ran away to the forest, running on all 4 legs like an animal would. They then approached the sheep, and my grandpa said how the sheep was on the ground, but it was still alive, but it was completely unskinned. It was horrifying, at least. My grandfather then sacrificed it to stop the suffering. After that night, a family friend told us a story about someone new in town that apparently was a naaldlooshii. He told us he spoke to that man and he told him to leave the town. Indeed, we never happened to live something similar after that. I saw some videos about skinwalkers on TikTok, so I started watching videos about them on YouTube, and there was a whole podcast where this guy just read stories about them from Reddit and other stories that people submitted. Our ward at church purchased a piece of land way back in the day. It's seriously just wooded area with a little bit of swamp. We would always go there for campouts and scouts, and at night, when it was pitch black, we would all play manhunt. Well, one time, we all got down to one person whose name was David. Growing up, he was super fast, and he would hide really good, so nobody could ever find him. He would always end up being the last person. Well, one time, it was down to David, and we had split up and gone way deep in the forest towards the swamp because it seems like it was impossible to find him. We thought he might have gone a little bit further than we normally go. We started getting into some more muddy and wet terrain as we get closer to a swamp-like area where the water is most likely shin deep, and we saw David way out in the swamp, and he wasn't wearing a shirt. And with the spotlight on him, he looked super pale, but he just stood there and didn't say a word. You could seriously tell something was off. Then, all of a sudden, we heard David from behind us, yelling, trying to get our attention, so we would keep trying to chase him down. Meaning, what we saw in front of us was definitely not him. So being a bunch of 12 to 17-year-old boys, we started yelling and running back to the campsite as fast as we could. Nobody believed us. In fact, for years everybody made fun of it, calling the ghost of David. But then I started listening to these stories, and every single one of them sounds just like what happened in some way or another. I am Navajo. We had an incident with an unwelcome visitor in our home. Here's what happened. My cousin is sleeping over. He's the same age as me. We're both 13 at this time. We're in my room, talking and hanging out. It is around maybe 11 p.m. It is a pleasant summer evening, so my window is wide open. It's also pretty dark outside, and my dad is in the living room watching TV. But as always, he's dozed off on the couch. My mom has already gone to bed. My cousin and I are keeping it down, but we're not ready yet to call it a night. All of a sudden, we hear the screen door to the front of the house open and slam shut. We think it's my dad. My mom, she tells us the next day she hears footsteps on the carpet. Whoever it is, she says, goes through her room and towards the bathroom, so she naturally assumes it's my dad. Then she realizes that she's unable to move, as if she's paralyzed. Still, in my room, my cousin and I again hear the screen door open and slam, only this time more loud. It wakes up my dad, and he comes to my bedroom to check on us. Finding us both there, he wants to know which one of my friends just slipped out of the house. It takes a few minutes, but we convince him we were by ourselves, and that we thought it was him going in and out. I can see by the look on his face, he's not really buying it, but he has to admit we don't seem to be lying. He then leaves, and as he's closing the door to my room, he tells us to stay out of trouble and go to sleep. All we could do is shrug. The next morning, my mom tells us about what she heard and how she could not move. She also tells us that the second time the door slams, she then hears what sounds like a horse galloping by her bedroom window. She then has all of us pray, and now, every year, we hike up the mountain to a high point and we pray for protection from evil. This event happened just south of Polaca, Arizona, within the Navajo reservation. A pair of skinwalkers, they say an old couple that lived deep back in the reservation, were seen lurking around this small cattle ranch. 2 heifers had disappeared recently, one of which was discovered down by the creek and mutilated. The man who owned the ranch, his 2 sons, and his brother armed themselves and went out to try to run them off. One of the sons, not yet 18 years of age, was searching out beyond the barn when a dark shape, materializing from the darkness itself, loomed up in front of him, almost nose to nose. As the boy attempted to raise his rifle, the figure raised its hands up to its face as if it was going to yell something. The boy, trying not to look at it in the eyes, then felt something rush into his face like dust or sand. Even though he tried not to, he ended up taking a breath and some of it was inhaled in. Immediately, things went dark and he started experiencing hallucinations. The others found him only minutes later, on his knees, holding the sides of his head, and his eyes rolled back. He fell to the ground and went into some sort of trance. His body limped, and he became unresponsive. They carried him back to the house, and they summoned the local medicine man, who came and said some prayers over him, but he told the others there was nothing to be done but to wait for the dust, traces of which were still on his face, and his shirt to wear off. He promised he would come back the next day when the sun was up and bless the Hogan. Later,
After he had regained consciousness, the boy swore to the others that he was the victim of a dog-faced creature. He described it as not quite as tall as he is, thin and scraggly, with patches of mangy and dark hair, a canine snout only shorter than a dog's, and with the smell of rotten eggs or worse. He said he doesn't recall anything more before passing out, other than not being able to breathe and having no control over his own body. I was only 17 at the time. On this specific night, I woke up feeling thirsty. I'm just lying there, staring into the dark, and deciding if it's worth the effort to get up and get something to drink. I'm sure we all been in that situation plenty of times before. So tonight, when you're in bed and you're questioning if you should get up and get some water, remember this story. So all I can hear is the clock ticking down the hallway and the muted silence. It's just way too quiet. I check the time on my cell phone. It's a few minutes short of 2:30 a.m. I then decide to sit up and get out the bed. I then make my way towards the door of my bedroom. It's really dark. I go down the hallway towards the kitchen. As I get out to the living room, I chance to look to my right and in the direction of the front door to the house. The only light is coming from a street light that is down at the end of the property and not all that far away. There, at the inside of the door, inside the house, I see this figure standing there. Its face at first appears human, then serpent-like, and then back to human, as if it can't decide how it wants to present itself to me. For some reason, I'm just standing there taking this all in. I'm not afraid, but I don't feel like I have any control over my senses either. And I'm not sure if I could move or have said anything, even if I wanted to, which at the time, I can't say I did. As the two of us are standing face to face, he assumes his human features. His face is fully painted, a thick stripe of black across his eyes, and the rest white. He has a feather woven into the hair at the top of his head. He looks young, not much older than me. He is bare-chested, not real muscular, but definitely cut. His torso is painted red. His lower half is covered in what looks to be khaki-colored pants, well worn and faded, cut off and frayed just below the knees. He is barefooted, but his wrists and ankles are wrapped with animal skin of some sort. It is hairy and light, colored like that of a coyote. He doesn't say anything to me, not aloud anyway, but I do hear his words in my head, although for the life of me, I can't remember any of it. It's as if he at the same time, with this cold stare of his, is pinching away layers of my memory. I do remember wondering why he is in my house, and having the idea that he was expecting to find someone else. Just then, without even thinking about it, my cell phone in my hand, I begin dialing 911. With the phone ringing, I look back to the painted stranger. He gives me a thin smile and vanishes through the door, which by the way is closed and locked. To the other side, I hear what sounds like a horse galloping away. I move over to the door and pull it open. I see this figure taking long strides across my yard, away from the light and out into the street. There's a car parked on the other side. He goes around to the passenger side, ducks down and into the car, and it drives off. It all happens in a matter of seconds.
I then realize there's a police operator talking back to me from the phone. I tell her there was someone in my house, but I leave out the part about his changing appearance and leaving through a closed door. The operator, or whoever she was, tells me not to worry about it. She says that I'm not the first caller of this kind on this night. She tells me to say a prayer, telling me that she too is Navajo, and to go back to bed, and that I won't be bothered by it anymore.